Now I'm going to tell you a story that takes place in Quebec at a time when it was very dangerous to live here, because in those days everyone knew that the devil himself walked the roads of Quebec looking for souls to steal. And of all the souls he could get his hands on, the ones that he prized the most were the souls of the people of Saint-Agathe, the most pious town in all of Quebec. Oh, those people, they didn't go to church only on Sunday, they went to church every day of the week, and the priest in that town was a very happy man. Now in that town there was a little girl named Ti-Fleur, and she was a rambunctious 14-year-old girl. Oh, if there was a party going on in town, you could be sure that Ti-Fleur was there celebrating it. And if there was a game going on in town, you could be sure that Ti-Fleur was there winning it. And if there was a fight going on in town, you could be sure that Ti-Fleur was there ending it. Now, Ti-Fleur loved living in Saint-Agathe because they celebrated all the holidays with so much enthusiasm. She loved Easter and she loved Christmas, but of all the holidays they celebrated, the one that she loved the most was the celebration of Mardi Gras, Fat Tuesday, the day before Ash Wednesday, before the beginning of Lent. Now in Quebec, it is traditional that on Mardi Gras you bring out the best food and the oldest of drink, and everyone eats to their fill, and when they're done, they put the tables away, and out comes the musician, and he plays music all night. But all of that has to stop at midnight, because if you're caught celebrating after midnight, well then the devil could take your soul. And so it was that one year, everyone was getting ready for Mardi Gras celebrations when, unfortunately, right before Mardi Gras, old Henri Bourgoin, the town fiddler, passed away very suddenly. And without a fiddle player, well, there was no music. If there's no music, well, then there's no dancing. If there's no dancing, well, there's no point in having a town celebration. So in the town of Saint-Agathe, they decided that they were going to have a very quiet Mardi Gras celebration within their homes, just with their families. Everyone except for Ti-Fleur, because Ti-Fleur loved the celebration of Mardi Gras. She loved the food, she loved the music, she loved the dancing, and so she decided that she was going to find a fiddle player to play in their town. So when the teacher wasn't looking, she crawled out of a window of the schoolhouse and she made her way down to the crossroads. Now, the crossroads was a place between the towns where people came and they exchanged bits of news and gossip, and they did a little bartering, a little trading. And Ti-Fleur hid herself in the bushes by the crossroads, and she listened. And she heard all sorts of news and gossip about what was happening in that town, happening to that family, until finally she noticed two young women who were walking down the roads toward her. And they were talking, and the first one said, "Did you hear? There's a young musician looking for a place to play for Mardi Gras celebrations." "Oh, really?" said the second girl. "Is he talented?" "Is he talented?" said the first girl. "Well, I've never heard him play, but they say when he puts bow to fiddle, it's the most beautiful music that you've ever heard. They say that he wears this colorful sash around his waist, and the music is so enchanting, even the scarf seems to dance with a mind of its own." Well, that's all Ti-Fleur needed to hear, and she started looking up and down those roads looking for that young man, and pretty soon she saw him walking down the road towards her with a fiddle underneath his arm and a colorful sash tied around his waist and a hat for some odd reason. And so when the young man crossed by where Ti-Fleur was hidden, she stepped out of the bushes and she said, "My name is Ti-Fleur of Saint-Agathe, and I have come to invite you to play your fiddle in our Mardi Gras celebrations." Now the young man was surprised to be addressed by such a young girl, but he cocked his head to the side and he said, "I would be honored to play my fiddle in a town as famous and as pious as Saint-Agathe." So Ti-Fleur took him by the scarf and she led him back to the town. Now the townspeople, of course, were overjoyed that they were going now to have a fiddle player, and Ti-Fleur expected a hero's welcome for all of her hard work, but instead she got punished by the school teacher for leaving the school without permission, and then she got punished by her parents for leaving the town without permission. Of course, they accepted the fiddle player, and Ti-Fleur was shut up into the priest's house with all the other children, just as the grown-ups were getting the town hall ready for the celebration that was to take place that very night. Ti-Fleur was beside herself with rage. All that hard work, and she was going to miss the party anyway. So when the priest wasn't looking, she crawled out of the window. Nobody locked their windows in this town. She crawled out of a window and she went down to the town hall, and then she went around to the back end, and then she was looking through the kitchen window and she could see them preparing the food, la tourtière, and there was pudding chômeur, and for some reason there were pierogies, and there was tuna pizza, and we were trying stuff new. That's where the Mariposa got started. It was Victor that was working in the kitchen, and I know her mouth was watering at all that beautiful food being made. And then she went around to the side of the church hall and she looked in, and she could see the adults were getting everything ready, putting out the tables, the tablecloths, putting up the decorations for the celebration. And that's when she heard an odd sound. Plink, 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 plink. She hid behind a tree and she looked over, and she could see the fiddle player there sitting on a fence, and he was plucking the strings on his fiddle. Plink, plink, plunk. The first string broke. Don't break your string. The first string broke. He pulled the old string from the fiddle and he dropped it on the ground. He pulled a new string from his pocket and he restrung the fiddle. He plucked at the second string. Plink, plink, plunk. It broke. He pulled the old string from the fiddle, dropped it on the ground, pulled a new string from his pocket, and he restrung the fiddle. He plucked at the third string, plink, plink. He plucked at the fourth string, plink. It broke. He looked annoyed as he pulled the old string from the fiddle, dropped it on the ground, pulled a new string from his pocket, and he restrung the fiddle. Now Ti-Fleur was just about to go over and talk to him when suddenly he stood up. He put the fiddle underneath his arm, and he walked into the church hall. And as Ti-Fleur watched him go, she heard her name being called. Ti-Fleur, Ti-Fleur. She hid behind the tree. She thought maybe one of the adults had seen her, but she looked around and saw no one, and still the voices continued. Ti-Fleur, Ti-Fleur. She looked down and she realized that the voices were coming from the strings that were lying on the ground. She picked them up with her hand, and they glowed with their own light, and they felt strangely warm to the touch. Who are you? She said. Ti-Fleur, said the strings. We are lost souls. But that is no ordinary fiddle player, but the devil himself. Tonight he will play his fiddle for your town. He will cast a spell upon the people, and he will make them dance, dance, dance beyond midnight, and then he will take their souls. And Ti-Fleur was beside herself with fear. The devil was in their town, and she was the one that brought him. What can I do? She said. The strings spoke, and they said, Ti-Fleur, right before midnight you must take us, and you must throw us underneath his feet, and that will break the spell upon your town. But what about me? She said. When I hear the music, won't it cause me to dance? No, said the strings, for our magic will keep you safe. And Ti-Fleur sat there by the fence, and she wept. Now that night they had a big old party for Mardi Gras. They brought out the newest of food and the oldest of drink, and when everyone had their fill, they pushed themselves away from the tables. They unbuckled their belts a little bit. I know it looks like I just came from there, doesn't it? And then they took all the tables and they piled them up in the corner, and they threw the tablecloths over them, and they brought out a seat for the fiddle player, and he sat down, and there was a hush over the crowd, and they all looked at him, and he began to play. People were transfixed. They had never heard such a sorrowful song. The women were crying and the men were wiping their eyes. Just when they thought they could take the pain of this song no longer, suddenly the tempo changed. And as soon as the people heard the music pouring out of the fiddle, they couldn't help themselves. They jumped up and they began to dance. There were men with women and women with men, men with men and women with women, and they began to dance in a mad fury in that church hall. They danced and they spun around, unable to help themselves. And Ti-Fleur, who was hidden in the corner of the room underneath all of those tables, when she heard the music, she had to admit it was the most beautiful music she had ever heard, even though she was protected by the magic of those strings. She could feel the people dancing. The floor vibrated beneath her feet, and she waited and waited as the evening wore on. Hours passed, and suddenly Ti-Fleur could feel the floor was no longer vibrating. So she picked up the edge of the the tablecloth, and she could see all the people dancing in a mad fury in that church hall. And she looked over in the corner, and she could see the fiddle player there playing his fiddle in a mad fury, and there was flame coming out of his eyes, and black smoke poured out of the fiddle. And she knew that must almost be midnight, because the floor stopped vibrating. She saw the people, and they started to rise higher and higher in the air, dancing on nothing. And she knew it was her time. She picked up the strings. She ran from underneath her hiding place. She ran straight for the devil. She took the strings and she threw them beneath his feet. And as soon as the devil stepped on those strings, he screamed as if he had stepped on knives. And all the people fell to the floor. And they looked up and they saw Ti-Fleur standing there. And they knew, keep going. And they knew how close they had come to losing their souls to the devil that very night. They all turned and looked at the fiddle player, and now he was still playing, and his scarf weaved and danced as if it was enchanted by the music itself. But now it was his turn. He started to rise higher and higher in the air as he played. And the people watched him as he reached the top of the church hall. It looked like he would bump his head on the ceiling, but he passed right through it as if he were a ghost. Everyone came out of the church hall and they watched as the fiddle player rose higher and higher in the air with that scarf weaving and dancing as if it had a mind of its own. And just before the fiddle player disappeared from view, he looked down at them all, he cocked his head to the side and he laughed and he disappeared. Now if you ever go to St. Agathe, right around the time of Mardi Gras, look up in the night sky and you may still see the devil's scarf weaving and dancing in the sky. Of course, nowadays we call that the Northern Lights, but now you know what they really are. And if you listen very carefully, you might still hear the fiddle player, the devil, playing that fiddle, and you will have to agree it's the most beautiful music that you will have ever heard. Thank you, Jeff. We've been rehearsing for weeks. Thank you, Jeff. Thank you very much.